Hello students, welcome to the lecture on business practices and principles for managers. And after this lecture, we will be able to learn the following objectives. Understand the term decision making. Discuss the traditional approaches to decision making. Understand the decision making under certainty and uncertainty. Define the decision tree. Describe the group-aided decisions. Discuss the brainstorming. Explain the creativity, creative problem solving. Let's start with a brief introduction to decision making. The process of decision making generally analyzes a problem in stages until a variable solution develops. Decisions might be made by a group or one person who compares options. The final step is acting on the information learned during the process of decision making.
My name is Michael Mauboussin. I'm head of Global Financial Strategies at Credit Suisse. And today I'd like to talk about how to improve decision making. Now, in the world of science, there's actually a very interesting framework to understand how theories develop and improve over time. The first phase is called observation, where you just figure out what you want to talk about, you agree on the terms, and you observe a lot of information. The second phase is called classification, where you take all that information and you sort it into buckets, into classifications. The third step is figuring out definition, like what causes what to happen. Let me give you one example from the world of flight. So for centuries, humans want to know how to fly. That's the observation phase. When they went into the real world, they said, well, it looks like the things that fly tend to be things with wings and feathers. So what did the first humans do? They fashioned wings, stuck on feathers, went to a really high spot, jumped, flapped, and then crashed. That was the anomaly. So that's not the right answer. Had to go back to the basics. Turns out around in the early 1700s, there was a scientist named Daniel Bernoulli who worked on fluid mechanics. And as part of that, he started to understand this concept called the airfoil. That's something that provides lift. And it turns out that is one of the keys to flight. So as people understood the notion of the airfoil and lift, came along into the early 1900s, and the Wright brothers said, that's the key. If we can combine that with a little bit of propulsion technology and some steering, we can create an airplane that flies. It has nothing to do with wings and feathers. It has all to do with the airfoil. So now we have a sense on how we improve understanding causality. Now we can turn to the second topic, which is how do we improve our forecasts? And the key idea here is something called the inside versus the outside view. Here's an example from the world of mergers and acquisitions when two companies combine. The inside view usually means that companies are very optimistic. They can see all the positives of the deal, the strategic value, and all the financial savings they're going to accrue. But if you look at the outside view, what you see is about 60% of the time, the stock of the acquiring company fails to go up. In fact, it usually goes down. So notwithstanding there's a lot of optimism on the inside view, the outside view often gives you a much more nuanced and often less optimistic point of view. There's a third area that's really important, which is how do we take new information that comes in and integrate it with our point of view? Typically, we don't really take into consideration new information. The first major barrier to that is something called confirmation bias. Once you've decided on something and you think this is the right way to think about it, new information that comes in, either you blow it off, you just disregard it or don't pay attention to it, or if it's ambiguous, you interpret it in a way that's favorable to you. Now the next problem we all have this is what's called pseudo and subtly diagnostic information. So pseudo-diagnostic means information that really isn't very relevant, but you think it is. Subtly diagnostic is information that really is relevant and you kind of don't pay attention to it. One of the things people look at in an M&A deal is whether it adds to earnings. Well, it turns out that doesn't really correlate very highly with whether it's a good deal or a bad deal. Other things correlate much higher. For example, are you getting more than what you pay for? That's much more subtle, but much more relevant in terms of determining whether it's a good deal or a bad deal. So the key in all this is to say, we have this torrent of information coming in. How do I sort that and figure out what really should lead me to increase or decrease my probabilities of a particular event happening? So that's really the third part of decision making. The first is understanding causality much more effectively. The second is understanding how to think about forecasting using the inside versus the outside view. And the third is how to take new information in, sort it properly, and apply what's relevant to improving your understanding of it.
Let's now talk about the basic definition of decision making. Here are two standard definitions of the term. Decision making is the study of determining and choosing among options or alternatives based on the preferences and values of the individual. Decision making is the process of reducing any hesitation or uncertainty about the available options in order to attain a practical and sensible choice. Part of making decisions is gathering information before making the best choice. Kinds of decisions. Decisions can be categorized into three basic classifications. Decisions whether this type of decision is a yes, no, or either or decision. Before choosing the best and most suitable choice, the person decides whether it is amendable or not. Decisions which these decisions are taken from a set of alternatives which are compared to each other for the most probable and beneficial option based on a set of criteria. Contingent decisions. These are decisions that were already identified but are set aside until the conditions are approved and met. Many people have already created contingent decisions, but they keep it until an opportunity to apply the decision comes along. Decision-making approaches. The major approaches to decision-making can be classified into three methods. Individual. The individual makes the decision based on personal values and preferences. Individual approach to decision-making is challenging and difficult at times because some people are too dependent on others for a sound decision. Authoritarian. In this approach, the decision relies on the leader or head of the group or team. As the sole decision maker, the leader must make sure that sufficient knowledge is gathered in order for the decision to be beneficial for the group. This approach is otherwise known as consensus. The members brainstorm and share ideas, discuss the considerations, and then implement on an agreed decision. A group decision usually is more effective because everyone takes accountability for whatever outcome there is. Importance and steps in decision making. Decision making is usually defined as the act of making up our mind about something. The process of decision making is not as easy as it sounds. There are certain important decisions that we have to make which can change the course of our life. Even at a workplace, one is confronted with problems or dilemmas where the solutions should cater to the needs of others around us. How to make a decision in 6 steps. Defining the problem. The first step towards a decision-making procedure is to define the problem. Obviously, there would be no need to make a decision without having a problem. Develop alternatives. The situation of making a decision arises because there are many alternatives available for it. The next step after defining the main problem would be to state out the alternatives available for that particular situation. Evaluate the alternatives. This can be said to be one of the most important stages of the decision-making procedure. This is the stage where we have to analyze each alternative we have to come up with. We have to find out the advantages and disadvantages of each option. Make the decision. This is the stage where the hard work we have put in analyzing would lead to a proper decision. The evaluation process would help us with clearly looking at the available options, and we have to pick whichever we think the most applicable. Implement the solution. The next obvious step after choosing an option would be implementing the solution. Just making the decision would not give the result one wants. Monitor the solution. Just making a decision and implementing it is not the end of the decision-making procedure. It is crucial to monitor our decision regularly once they are implemented.
Making the right decisions is absolutely crucial because it will ultimately determine whether or not you accomplish your goals. And the tips that I'm going to share with you in this video are the exact same tips that successful people, including myself, have made use of for many years to make the right decisions all the time. First, you need to make sure you're in the right frame of mind. You need to be in the right frame of mind when making decisions. The reason why I said so is because if you make decisions when you are feeling angry, upset, annoyed, depressed, unhappy, chances are the decisions you make will eventually have a negative outcome. However, when you make a decision while you are feeling happy, relaxed, optimistic, chances are the decisions that you will make will end up having a positive outcome. Second, you need to stop thinking about your choices. What you need to do instead is to start feeling about the possible choices that you have before choosing which choice you're going to make as your decision. What this means is that you need to fully explore each of the possible choices and run through in your head how you feel about each of them and choose the ones that you feel most comfortable with. Doing so will significantly improve your chances of being able to make the right decision that will have a positive outcome. And finally, you need to look at and evaluate all possible options objectively. Many times, we tend to make decisions based on our emotions. Don't do that. Because depending on our emotions at that point in time when we make it, it may have a negative outcome. What you need to do instead is to look at all possible options objectively, whether you evaluate the pros and cons of each and every option before you decide on the option that you opt for. Remember, whatever decisions you make sure that you make it with a sound mind. Do not let your emotions come into play when you make decisions. This will significantly help to increase the chances that the decision you make will have a positive outcome.
Moving on to the next topic, we shall now look at the traditional approaches to decision making. Decision making in this world of increased information, technology, population and communication is a serious and growing problem. The traditional method of decision making is not providing adequate results. Approaches to decision making. There are 4 basic approaches to decision making, which are: inactive approach. The decision maker does nothing of consequence to make a reasoned choice. In effect, the choice is to let the problem resolve itself. This approach, let the chips fall where they may, is rather common in everyday decision making. Reactive approach. The decision maker opts for a course of action by reacting possibly unawares to the perceived situation, which may itself be the result of decisions made by other stakeholders of the problem. Again, this approach is quite common in day-to-day decision making. Proactive approach. The decision making opts for a course of action by first carefully analyzing the problem situation within its relative context, the environment in which the problem situation is embedded, system concepts, then devising and evaluating prospective measures that would serve to attain the intended objectives while complying with all applicable constraints, and only then choosing the most promising alternative. Interactive approach. The decision maker probes the decision problem by experimenting with tentative courses of action before making the final choice. In effect, the decision problem itself is used as a test bed to explore the desirability of possible alternative solutions. Proactive decision making. An intelligent approach to decision making would generally observe the following steps. Recognize and define the problem. This refers to the process of correctly identifying and making explicit the problem or opportunity faced by the decision maker. To do this, one must first become aware that a problem or opportunity does in fact exist before proceeding to state in writing the goal or objectives to be pursued, along with a set of constraints that must be complied with. Gather information about the problem. Information gathering strives to ascertain facts that are relevant to the decision problem. This often reduces to a search for answers to questions raised by the decision maker. Identify action alternatives. Creativity is the key in this phase of the decision process. As the decision maker gathers information, she begins conceiving possible solution alternatives. Traditional decision making draws heavily on subjective criteria based on intuition, experience, and personal judgment in order to generate action alternatives. Determine the evaluation criteria. In order to evaluate the action alternatives, the decision maker must first determine the evaluation criteria along with the relative importance of each criterion. Evaluate the alternatives. The decision making compares the pros and cons of each action alternative in accordance with the evaluation criteria. Benefits and costs are estimated, and each alternative's potential for attaining the goal or objectives is assessed. Select the best alternative. His is the classic decision point choice. By now goes the traditional argument the decision maker ought to be clear on which alternative seems to be the most promising course of action. Consequently, the decision is made based in large part on personal judgment. However, even in moderately complex problems, the best alternative may not be readily apparent. Implement the chosen alternative. In an organizational setting, the decision maker sets in motion a course of action that involves the customary managerial tasks: planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. Evaluate the results. Learn from both successes and mistakes. Students, moving on to the next topic, we shall now discuss about decision making under certainty. Decision making under certainty implies that we are certain of the future state of nature. The solution naturally is to choose the alternative that gives us the most favorable outcome. Although this may seem like a trivial exercise, there are many problems that are so complex that sophisticated mathematical techniques are needed to find the best solution. Linear programming. One common technique for decision making under certainty is called linear programming. In this method, a desired benefit such as profit can be expressed as a mathematical function, the value model or objective function of several variables. The solution is the set of values for the independent variables, decision variables, that serves to maximize the benefit or in many problems to minimize the cost, subject to certain limits, constraints. Let us now talk about the decision making under uncertainty. At times, the decision maker cannot access the probability of occurrence for the various states of nature. Different approaches to decision making under uncertainty include the following. The optimistic decision maker may choose the alternative that offers the highest possible outcome, the maximax solution. The pessimist decision maker may choose the alternative whose worst outcome is least bad, the maximum solution. The third decision maker may choose a position somewhere between optimism and pessimism, Hurwitz's approach. Another decision maker simply assume that all states of nature are equally likely, the so-called principle of insufficient reason. Set all values equal to 1.0 and maximize expected value based on that assumption. The fifth decision maker may choose the alternative that has the smallest difference between the best and worst outcomes, the minimax regret solution. Programmed and non-programmed decision making. Programmed decisions are best in highly structured environments with established goals and channels of information. Non-programmed decision making applies to specific concerns and infrequent decisions so that no rule can guide decisions. Non-programmed decision making is reactive rather than proactive. Programmed versus non-programmed. A good analogy for the differences between programmed and non-programmed decisions is a custom designed and produced product compared to a mass-produced one. Let's now move on to the next topic, decision tree. Decision tree structures are a common way to organize classification schemes. In classifying tasks, decision trees visualize what steps are taken to arrive at a classification. Every decision tree begins what is termed as a root node, considered to be the parent of every other node. Every node in the tree evaluates an attribute in the data and determines which path it should follow. Typically, the decision test is based on comparing a value against some constant. Now we shall talk about group decision. The functionality of a group in terms of performance has been known to be effective in various aspects such as conflict situations, problem solving, and decision making. The group takes into account the individual needs and ideas of the members, making it a collaborative approach in dealing with just about any kind of situation. Consensus decision making. If leadership decision making is commonly termed as authoritative style, group decision making is otherwise known as consensus. Decision making, a consensus decision making process should have the following characteristics. Inclusive. It should involve not just a few selected members, but everyone in the team. Participatory. Each member must actively suggest and solicit opinions, inputs, and alternatives during the decision-making process. Cooperative. The members must strive to achieve the best possible alternative which is deemed beneficial for the group rather than just going for majority opinion. Egalitarian. All members have equal rights and roles in the process. Solution-oriented. The group must manifest a general agreement on the most effective decision and resolve any differences through methods such as compromise and negotiation in order to avoid conflict. Most logical. The group would not only resort to the most logical decision if there is lack of cooperation from the members. Group decision-making techniques. Various methods may be used by a group in decision-making. The following methods are commonly used by many groups. Brainstorming. The process of brainstorming involves members discussing and suggesting opinions as well as alternatives for a decision. Dialectical inquiry. In this group decision-making technique, the members are divided into two groups who will debate on the pros and cons of the alternatives. Nominal group technique. A structured approach in decision-making, the nominal group technique requires each member to develop a list of possible alternatives in writing. Delphi technique. The Delphi technique is applicable only when the members are on separate physical locations.
Making decisions can be hard enough, but making them with a group can be particularly tricky. Let's look at an example of group decision-making and how using decision skills can help. This is Mike, Chris, Matt, and Arlo. They like hanging out together because they're pretty good friends. This Friday night, they're going out to eat before they go to a friend's party. "Where do you want to go?" says Mike. "I don't care," says Chris. "Me neither," says Matt. "As long as it's good," says Arlo. Sounds like it should be pretty easy, right? But here's the thing. Mike, Chris, Matt, and Arlo all have different ideas about how this is going to work out. And they have different thoughts about what they would like and what is important to them. And they might just be assuming that those same things are important to all of them. But no worries. The guys have been friends for a long time and know that they need to work some stuff out. Without even really thinking about it, they begin communicating and clarifying. "I was thinking pizza," says Mike. "I had pizza for lunch. How about Thai, or the diner for a change?" "I'm a little strapped for cash this week, so can we make it on the cheaper side?" says Matt. "And how are we going to get there?" says Arlo. That's a good start, but now they dig a little deeper. "I've got my mother's car this evening, so I can drive," says Matt. "And the party doesn't start until later, so we've got plenty of time," says Mike. "Last time I went to the Thai place, it was good, but it's not very cheap." "We could try that taco place that just opened up on Maple Ave. Has anyone been there? Is it any good?" "I haven't heard anything about it, other than it's finally open." Tacos are cheap, but if they're bad, they're really bad. "Is pizza out?" "I could go for a slice." "I couldn't do pizza, but I guess I could order a cheesesteak instead. I'm just feeling a little cheesed out, you know?" "Alright, pizza's off the list. And so's Thai. It'd be good, but it's too much to spend for this week." "Fine. So, diner or new tacos?" "Tacos would be closer. It's only a couple of blocks, while the diner is all the way out on the highway." "Yeah, but we know the diner is good, and the cherry pie is pretty much worth the trip." "Yeah, but we could try something new." If only we knew if the taco place was good or not. Right around here is when people fall into one of the biggest group decision traps: decision fatigue. This is when you get sick of discussing an issue and just want to throw in the towel and do whatever seems easiest. "Alright, I don't care anymore. Let's just get pizza like we always do." Then Chris says, "I don't really want pizza, come on. We just have to decide between the diner and the taco place. What do you think?" Arlo replies, "Alright, even though it might be a nice change, we don't know how good the taco place will be. I say we hold off on trying it until we hear something about it. And tonight, let's go to the diner. We've got a car so we can drive, which we might not have next week. There are all kinds of things on the menu so people can be adventurous if they don't want burgers and fries. Plus, it's cheap and it's good." Excellent. Good job, guys. You communicated and clarified the elements of your decision basis and thought your way to a good decision. And you stuck with it and didn't fall for decision fatigue.
Pros and cons of group decision making. A group decision making approach can be greatly beneficial to the group and its members in one of the following ways. It utilizes the diverse competencies and expertise of the members. It promotes collaboration and unity among the members in the group. The group as a whole is accountable for any consequence or outcome of the decision after it is implemented. It allows the members to voice out individual ideas and suggestions which can be helpful in arriving at a good decision. There are disadvantages to group decision making, and these are: the time frame for reaching a decision is generally slower in groups than individual approach. The problem of groupthink may adversely affect the group members. Groupthink happens when the members are pressured to agree to majority opinion. Group polarization may also happen, which refers to the tendency of the group to settle for extreme and high-risk solutions to address problems. Students, can any one of you describe brainstorming? Brainstorming works by focusing on a problem and then deliberately coming up with as many solutions as possible by pushing the ideas as far as possible. One of the reasons it is so effective is that the brainstormers not only come up with new ideas in a session, but also spark off from associations with other people's ideas by developing and refining them. There are 4 basic rules in brainstorming intended to reduce social inhibitions among team members, stimulate idea generation, and increase overall creativity. No criticism. Criticism of ideas are withheld during the brainstorming session, as the purpose is on generating varied and unusual ideas and extending or adding to these ideas. Welcome unusual ideas. Unusual ideas are welcomed as it is normally easier to tame down than to tame up, as new ways of thinking and looking at the world may provide better solutions. Quantity wanted. The greater the number of ideas generated, the greater the chance of producing a radical and effective solution. Combine and improve ideas. Not only are a variety of ideas wanted, but also ways to combine ideas in order to make them better. Brainstorming steps. Gather the participants from as wide a range of disciplines with as broad a range of experience as possible. This brings many more creative ideas to the session. Write down a brief description of the problem. The leader should take control of the session, initially defining the problem to be solved with any criteria that must be met, and then keeping the session on course. Using the description to get everyone's mind clear of what the problem is and post it where it can be seen. Encourage an enthusiastic, uncritical attitude among brainstormers and encourage participation by all members of the team. Write down all the solutions that come to mind, even ribald ones. Do not evaluate ideas until the session moves to the evaluation phase. Do not censor any solution, no matter how silly it sounds. The leader should keep the brainstorming on subject and should try to steer it towards the development of some practical solutions. Once all the solutions have been written down, evaluate the list to determine the best action to correct the problem. Brainstorming variations. One approach is to see the session with a word pulled randomly from a dictionary. Use this word as a starting point in the process of generating ideas. When the participants say they cannot think of any more ideas, then give them about 50 more minutes, as the best ideas sometimes come towards the end of a longer thought process. Brainstorming can either be carried out by individuals or groups. Keep all the generated ideas visible. As a flip chart page becomes full, remove it from the pad and tape it to a wall as that is visible. If the brainstormers have difficulty in coming up with solutions, we may have to restate the problem in a different context, such as using metaphors or linking it to own knowledge.
Brainstorming is the most widely implemented creativity technique of all time. It was pioneered by this ad executive named Alex Osborne. In a series of best-selling business books in the late 1940s and early 50s, he outlined this technique called brainstorming, which basically there's just one rule to brainstorming, which is don't criticize. Whatever you do in a brainstorming meeting, you cannot criticize the ideas of other people, that all ideas are good ideas. And the assumption behind this is that the imagination is very meek and shy and fragile. And if it's worried about being criticized, it'll just clam up and it won't be able to free associate at all. But the only problem with brainstorming is that it just doesn't work. Psychologists have known this for 60+ years. Study after study has shown that you put people in a room and tell them to brainstorm, they're going to come up with fewer ideas and less original ideas than those same people who might work by themselves. So brainstorming, we become less than the sum of our parts. Now, the reason brainstorming doesn't work returns us to the very first rule of brainstorming, which is thou shalt not criticize. Because as studies by Charlotte Namath have shown, groups that engage in what she calls debate and dissent, where they are encouraged to engage in constructive criticism, they come up with anywhere between 25 to 40% more ideas, and those ideas are rated as much more original. And that's because when we don't criticize each other, when we all just pretend every idea is a good idea, we tend to float on the superficial surface of the imagination. And our free associations left to their own devices are not that interesting. So if I ask you to free associate on blue, I can predict with a high degree of accuracy that your first answer will be green, followed by ocean, sky. Then things get a little more complicated, but you may say, Joni Mitchell or Miles Davis or jeans or Smurfs, but nothing too profound or surprising. And that's because our free associations are bound by language, and language is full of cliches. Now, the way we get past those cliches is to engage in criticism. That is what surprises us, that's what invigorates us, that's what wakes us up. It means we're really paying attention to the ideas of other people. It forces us to dig a little bit deeper, and that's when things get interesting.
Let's move on to the next topic, creativity, creative problem solving. Creativity is the ability of a person's mind to take ideas, facts and materials and perceive them in a unique way or manner. A different point of view, a new idea, or a new way of looking at a problem. What is the creative problem solving process, CPS? The creative problem solving process is capitalized because it is a specific process as opposed to speaking generally of creative problem solving. There are many different creative problem solving processes. Now in the end, let us summarize what we have learned in this lecture. Decision making is the process of reducing any hesitation or uncertainty about the available options in order to attain a practical and sensible choice. Decision making is a study of determining and choosing among options or alternatives based on the preferences and values of the individual. The Delphi technique is applicable only when the members are on separate physical locations. Brainstorming works by focusing on a problem and then deliberately coming up with as many solutions as possible and by pushing the ideas as far as possible. The functionality of a group in terms of performance has been known to be effective in various aspects such as conflict solutions, problem solving and decision making. Decision making in this world of increased information, technology, population and communication is a serious and growing problem.